The dish towel was still damp in my hands when my daughter-in-law ended my life as I knew it. I'd been washing up after spending the afternoon in her kitchen, the kitchen my money had bought, arranging the rehearsal dinner flowers that had arrived an hour late and 2 shades too pale. Brittany had complained about the color for 20 minutes before disappearing upstairs to try on her veil for what I counted as the 7th time that day. I hadn't said a word about the color. I'd smiled, nodded, and gone back to the sink. That was what I did. That was what I'd always done. Daniel was leaning against the counter scrolling through his phone when Brittany came back downstairs, her voice carrying that particular brightness it got when she'd made a decision she knew someone wasn't going to like. "Eleanor." She said my name the way you'd say the name of a piece of furniture you'd been meaning to replace. "I've been thinking, and I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is important." I turned off the faucet. "The best gift you could give us this weekend," she said, that plastic smile settling into place like a mask she'd worn so long she'd forgotten it was there, "is to just disappear from our family. Give us some space. Let us start our marriage without you in the middle of everything." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked at Daniel, my son, 40 years old, 6 feet tall, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike in our driveway on a Saturday morning 35 years ago. He was looking at his phone. "You heard her, Mom," he said without looking up. "This is supposed to be our special weekend. You're making everything feel heavy." I was making everything feel heavy. I set the dish towel on the counter. I looked around the kitchen. The quartz countertops I'd helped Brittany pick out on a Saturday afternoon 16 months ago. The custom open shelving Daniel had said they couldn't afford until I'd quietly covered the installation cost. The herb garden on the windowsill that I'd planted myself because Brittany had mentioned once, just once, that she thought fresh basil was romantic. "Where would you like me to go?" I asked. My voice came out very calm. I was almost surprised by it. Brittany shrugged one shoulder. "A hotel? Your friend's place? Honestly, Eleanor, I don't care. Just not here. This is my son's home, too. Actually." Daniel finally set his phone down. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, which I supposed was something. "Brittany's been handling everything around here. The finances, the improvements. You helped us get started, but I gave you $92,000, Daniel." Silence. "You gave it to us," Brittany said. The emphasis on gave was precise, almost surgical. "You made a choice. We didn't ask you to sell your house." I stood there for a moment longer, long enough to look at the herb garden one more time, long enough to notice that the basil had gotten leggy and overgrown because no one had been trimming it. Then something inside me shifted. Not broken. I want to be clear about that. Nothing broke. It was more like a gear clicking into place. Quiet. Final. "You're right," I said. "I should go." Brittany looked surprised. She'd expected tears, I think. Pleading. She'd expected the version of me that had spent 3 years making herself small so there would always be room for everyone else. "I'll be out within the hour," I said, and I went upstairs to pack. The guest room, I was never permitted to call it my room because guests are temporary and that was the point, had a narrow window that looked out over the backyard. I'd put up curtains in there myself, a soft cream linen, because the morning light came in hard and early. Brittany had never mentioned them. Not to thank me. Not at all. I folded my clothes slowly, deliberately. There was something clarifying about it. The simple act of deciding what was mine. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph of George. 41 years of marriage, and in all of them, he had never once made me feel like an inconvenience in my own home. He'd been gone 4 years now, and there were still mornings I reached across the bed before I remembered. I picked up the photo and wrapped it in a sweater before placing it in my bag. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I thought, the way I still talked to him sometimes when no one could hear. I know what I'm doing. I wasn't sure that was true, but I was starting to think it might be. Downstairs, I could hear Brittany on the phone with someone, laughing. "She's finally leaving. Oh my God, I thought she'd never go." I pulled my suitcase to the top of the stairs, paused, reached into my coat pocket and felt the shape of my house key, the one I'd been given when they moved in, the one I'd never used without calling first, because Brittany had made it clear, without ever quite saying so, that dropping by unannounced was not welcome. I almost left it on the nightstand. Then I put it back in my pocket. I wasn't sure why exactly, not yet. I sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes before I started the engine. Through the kitchen window, I could see Daniel opening a bottle of wine. He was smiling. The relief on his face was so plain it almost took my breath away. My son was relieved that I was leaving. I started the engine. I had one call to make before I did anything else. Sandra Powell had been my attorney since before George died. She'd been my college roommate before that, and my closest friend for 43 years. She was also the person who had, 3 years ago, quietly and without fanfare, insisted on structuring my $92,000 contribution to Daniel and Brittany's home purchase in a very particular way. At the time, I'd been too focused on keeping everyone happy to pay much attention to the paperwork. I was paying attention now. Sandra, she picked up on the second ring. I need you to pull the home purchase documentation. All of it. Tonight. A pause. I could hear the particular quality of her silence, the kind that meant she wasn't surprised. Eleanor, it's Saturday evening. Are you all right? I've been better. They asked me to leave. Ah, another pause. Then carefully. What exactly did they say? I told her everything. The kitchen, Brittany's smile, Daniel not looking up from his phone. The $92,000 reduced to you helped us get started in the space of one sentence. Sandra listened without interrupting. I could hear her typing. Eleanor, she said when I finished, do you remember why I insisted on those additional documents? The ones I had Brittany sign, or rather the ones she was supposed to sign. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She was supposed to sign an acknowledgement, some kind of formal paperwork. She never did. Sandra's voice was very even. I sent the forms 3 times over the course of 18 months. Each time the response was that she'd been busy, that she'd get to it, that there was no rush. And you, being you, never pressed the issue because you didn't want to cause friction. Sandra, the $92,000 was not structured as a gift, Eleanor. It was structured as a secured loan, with you listed as a co-borrower on the mortgage. And because Brittany never signed the acknowledgement transferring your interest, the deed still shows your name. She paused. You own 38% of that house. The street in front of me was very still. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's porch light clicked on. Say that again, I said. You are a legal co-owner of the property at 417 Birchwood Lane. 38%. It's all completely binding. The mortgage company has you on record. The deed is on file with the county. I have copies of everything. Through the kitchen window, Daniel was pouring a second glass of wine, celebrating their freedom, I imagined. Their freedom from the burdensome mother who made everything feel heavy. I watched him for a long moment. Sandra, I said, I need you to prepare a notice of intent to partition. A silence. Eleanor, are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I watched Daniel raise his glass. They want me to disappear. Fine, but I'm taking my 38% with me when I go. The Hampton Inn on Route 17 was clean and quiet and asked nothing of me except a credit card, which felt like the most honest transaction I'd had in years. The woman at the front desk gave me a room on the 3rd floor with a view of the parking lot, and I thought it was the most beautiful view I'd seen in months. I ordered room service, a grilled chicken sandwich and a cup of soup, and ate it sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the local news with the volume low. Then I made my second call. Magnolia Springs event venue, this is Heather. How can I help you? Heather, my name is Eleanor Hartwell. I'm the primary contract holder for a wedding reception tomorrow afternoon. Ballroom B, 5 o'clock, 190 guests. I kept my voice pleasant, businesslike. I need to cancel. A sharp intake of breath. Mrs. Hartwell, the reception is tomorrow. The catering team has been prepping since this morning. The floral arrangements are already... I understand completely. I'm prepared to pay all applicable cancellation fees as outlined in my contract. The remaining balance I'd like returned to my card on file. I paused. The contract is under my name with my credit card information. I do have the right to make changes, don't I? More papers shuffling. A long pause. Let me check with my manager. Of course, take your time. 14 minutes later, it was done. I sat back against the headboard, muted the television. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Brittany's name on the screen. I'd expected it would be her first. What did you do? Her voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The venue just called. They said you canceled our reception. Our wedding reception, Eleanor. There are 190 people coming tomorrow. I know, I said. That does sound like a significant logistical challenge. Don't you dare be calm right now. Do you have any idea what You told me to disappear from your family, I said. I'm honoring your request. I didn't mean, her voice cracked. Daniel? I could hear her, muffled, calling for him. Daniel, get on the phone. Daniel's voice came on, tighter, trying to be the reasonable one, which had always been his role when Brittany's tactics stopped working. Mom, this is insane. You cannot cancel our wedding because you're upset about sleeping arrangements. I didn't cancel your wedding, sweetheart. You can still get married. I only canceled the reception I was paying for. I paused. The one that was costing me $16,500. Silence. I'd never told them the number before. I'd learned somewhere along the way not to mention money. It made Brittany uncomfortable, and when Brittany was uncomfortable, Daniel got distant. And when Daniel got distant, I did whatever was necessary to bring him back. I'd been doing that calculation for 3 years without ever once thinking about what it was costing me. 16,000? Brittany's voice was faint now. The reception, the flowers, the photographer, the band, the custom cake that Brittany changed the design on twice. I said it gently, not cruelly, just as fact. Did you think it materialized because you wanted it? We can't tell 190 people there's no reception, Daniel said. Mom, be reasonable. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're resourceful adults. She's crying, Daniel said, low and urgent. Brittany is crying, Mom, on her wedding eve. I know, honey. I'm sorry it hurts. And I was. I want to be honest about that. Part of me was genuinely deeply sorry. But I also heard her on the phone tonight, after I went upstairs. She finally left. I thought she'd never go. That's a direct quote. The line went very quiet. I'll talk to you after the wedding, I said. Get some rest. I hung up. The room was peaceful. The parking lot lights cast long, even shadows across the ceiling. I lay back and stared at them, and tried to remember the last time I had gone to bed without a knot of anxiety in my chest, without a running mental list of what I needed to do, fix, smooth over, pay for, pretend not to notice. I couldn't remember. It had been that long. He knocked at 8:47 in the morning. I knew it was Daniel before I looked through the peephole. Brittany wouldn't come herself, not yet. She'd send him first to test the temperature. He was wearing the tuxedo shirt from last night, wrinkled, untucked. He hadn't slept. I opened the door but didn't step back. Mom, his eyes were red-rimmed. Please, Brittany's having a breakdown. Her mother is threatening to fly back to Georgia. The whole thing is... Come in, I said, and I stepped aside. He sat on the edge of the armchair. I remained standing. There was something important about that. Not as a power move, but because I needed to feel solid, rooted. I needed to remember that I was allowed to take up space. This is insane, he said. Over sleeping arrangements? This is not about sleeping arrangements, I said. This is not about the reception, or the house, or any single thing that happened this weekend. This is about 3 years of being treated like a problem to manage instead of a person to love. That's not... When was the last time you called me to ask how I was doing? I asked. Not because you needed something, just to hear my voice. He opened his mouth. I'll wait, I said. The silence stretched out. He looked at the floor, then at the window, then at his hands. Daniel, in the past 3 years, how much money do you think I've given you and Brittany? A few thousand here and there. For emergencies, $133,000. He went still. $92,000 for the down payment. $41,000 in what you called emergencies. Car repairs, credit card balances, utility bills that were always just a little more than expected. Groceries when the account was running short. I have every transfer recorded. My attorney has copies. I watched his face process this. That is more than most people earn in 2 years, Daniel. And in all of that time, not once, did either of you ask how I was living on $1,400 a month in retirement income. Mom, you were going to pay me back. It wasn't a question. That's what you're going to say, that you were always planning to pay me back. He didn't answer. Brittany is looking at a new car, I said. You've been pricing vacation packages to Italy. I know because Brittany mentioned the Amalfi Coast at dinner last month while I was washing up the dishes from the meal I'd cooked. I let that sit for a moment. Not one conversation about repayment. Not one. What do you want from me? His voice came out cracked, hollow. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand something." I sat down across from him, leaned forward so he had to look at me. "I didn't come here to punish you. I came here because I finally understood that if I didn't stop, I was going to give you everything I had and end up with nothing, and you were going to let me. Not because you're a bad person, but because I never taught you that there was a cost." The room was very quiet. "There's a legal situation you need to be aware of," I said, "regarding the house," and I told him. I watched the color leave his face in stages. First when I mentioned the co-borrower documentation, then when I said 38%, then when I explained what partition meant. "That's not possible," he said. "You gave us that money. You said, 'My attorney structured it as a loan with an ownership stake to protect my investment. Brittany was supposed to sign an acknowledgement releasing that interest.'" I paused. "She never did. My attorney sent the forms 3 times. She was busy with the wedding planning. For 3 years, Daniel." He sat with that. "You have options," I said. "We can discuss them properly with Sandra present, but I wanted you to know before the wedding, because you deserve to know what's coming." He stood up slowly, older somehow than he'd looked when he knocked on the door. "The wedding's in 4 hours, he said. "I know. Are you coming?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you're trying to memorize their face. "That depends on whether there's still a celebration worth attending. You still have a ceremony. Whether you and Brittany choose to mark this day with the people who love you or spend it making phone calls trying to undo last night is entirely up to you." He left without another word. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the in-room machine, sat by the window, watched a family load luggage into a minivan in the parking lot below, 2 small kids, a dog, a father who kept losing count of the bags and starting over. My phone buzzed. A text from Brittany. "Eleanor, please, I'll do anything. Name it." I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Then I picked up my book, the one I hadn't had a quiet afternoon to read in longer than I could remember, and I opened it to the first page. Outside the window, the morning was clear and bright and entirely indifferent to all of it. For the first time in 3 years, so was I. The calls started again at 11:53 that night. I'd spent the day quietly. Breakfast at the hotel restaurant. Eggs, toast, a second cup of coffee that I drank slowly and without guilt. A long walk along the waterfront path 2 blocks from the Hampton Inn, where I watched pelicans dive and an old man cast a fishing line into water that glittered like foil in the October light. A late lunch, a nap that lasted 2 hours, dreamless and deep, the kind of sleep I hadn't managed in longer than I could honestly remember. I didn't check my phone until 4 in the afternoon. 31 missed calls, 27 text messages, 3 voicemails. I listened to the voicemails in order. The first was from Daniel, left at 12:17 in the afternoon. "Mom, the ceremony was small, just close family, but Brittany is devastated about the reception. People keep asking what happened. Mom, please just call me back." The second was from a number I didn't recognize, Brittany's cousin Jennifer, who apparently felt that strangers calling to shame me was an appropriate response to the situation. The third was from Brittany herself, left at 3:44, and I will say this for it. The crying sounded real, not the tactical sobbing of the night before, something rawer. "Eleanor, I know you don't owe me anything right now. I know that. But there were people at that church who flew in from California and Colorado, and they didn't even get a glass of water afterward, and I don't know what you want from me. Tell me what you want." I set the phone down and went back to my book. At 11:53, it rang again. Daniel. "Mom." His voice had the particular flatness of someone who had been managing a crisis for 12 hours and was running out of reserves. "Can you just talk to us? Please." I turned down the television. "I'm here." Brittany's mother offered to pay for a dinner. She called 6 restaurants. 2 of them could have accommodated the group on short notice. A pause. "The venue told her you'd already canceled everything and refused reinstatement." "That's correct." "Why, Mom?" "Because the contract was under my name, Daniel, and I made a business decision." I kept my voice even. Not cold. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but clear. The way I used to be clear with students who needed boundaries more than they needed softness. If Brittany's mother wanted to host a celebration for her daughter, she was always free to arrange one herself, under her own name with her own credit card. A rustling sound. Then Brittany's voice came on. She must have grabbed the phone. "You are being vindictive," she said. "You are being vindictive and petty, and you are punishing us because your feelings got hurt." "Brittany," I waited until she stopped. "You told me the best gift I could give your family was to disappear permanently. Those were your exact words. I am simply taking them seriously." I was stressed. I know. Planning a wedding is genuinely difficult. I know that because I spent 4 months helping you plan this one. I paused. The invitations I addressed by hand. The florist I drove to 3 times because you kept changing the arrangement. The $16,500 I paid without being asked. I know how stressful this wedding was. I was there for most of it. Silence. "Brittany," I said more quietly now, "in 3 years, not once did you call me to ask how I was doing. My birthday last June, you and Daniel were in Cancun. I ate birthday cake alone at the kitchen table, your kitchen table, and I told myself it was fine, that you were young and busy, and that's just how it goes." I paused. "It is not fine, and I am done pretending that it is." She made a sound I couldn't quite interpret. Not crying. Something beyond that. Daniel came back on. "Mom, what do you want us to do?" "I want you to come to Sandra Powell's office on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, both of you. And I want you to bring a realistic picture of your finances. Income, expenses, debts, all of it." I let that land. "There are things we need to discuss about the house that cannot wait." A very long silence. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, Mom." I hung up, poured myself a small glass of bourbon. George had always kept bourbon in the house, and I'd adopted the habit after he died, purely for medicinal purposes, and sat by the window watching the parking lot lights until I was tired enough to sleep. The call from Officer Ray Sutton came Monday morning at 8:46, while I was eating oatmeal and reading the newspaper like a person who had nothing more pressing to do. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Officer Ray Sutton with the Virginia Beach Police Department. We received a report this weekend regarding a potential elder financial abuse situation, and also some concerns about," a careful pause, "cognitive decline. I'd like to come speak with you at your convenience, if that's all right." I set down my spoon. Cognitive decline. I sat with that for exactly 4 seconds. Then I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, precisely, but because it was so perfectly, completely predictable. When charm fails, try sympathy. When sympathy fails, try guilt. When guilt fails, call the authorities and suggest the other person has lost their mind. "Of course, Officer Sutton," I said pleasantly. "I'd be delighted to meet with you. In fact, I have quite a bit of documentation I think you'd find relevant. Would 10 o'clock work?" He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 38, with the kind of steady, patient manner that suggested he'd sat across from a great many difficult family situations and learned not to take sides before he had all the information. He met me in a small conference room at the precinct and offered me coffee, which I accepted. I placed my leather portfolio on the table and opened it. "Officer Sutton," I said, "I want to be fully cooperative with this process, so I'm going to show you everything I have, and I'd like you to tell me honestly what you think you're looking at." He nodded. Professional. Neutral. I walked him through it in order. 3 years of bank statements with the transfers to Daniel and Brittany's accounts highlighted in yellow. 11 transfers in the past year alone, totaling just over $19,000. The original mortgage documents showing my name as co-borrower. The deed showing 38% ownership. Sandra's emails to Brittany requesting the acknowledgement signature. 3 of them, 18 months apart, each answered with variations of "I'll get to it soon." Then I picked up my phone and pressed play on the voicemail Brittany had left at 2:51 in the morning. Sutton listened without expression as her voice filled the small room. "This is insane behavior. Normal people don't do this. We're worried about you, Eleanor. We think you might be having some kind of episode. Daniel thinks you need to see someone." When it finished, I pressed play on the second recording. This one was from the kitchen. Friday evening. I hadn't planned to record it. I'd accidentally started a voice memo on my phone when I reached into my pocket for a tissue, and by the time I realized what was happening, I'd decided to leave it running. A decision that had turned out to be one of the better accidents of my recent life. Brittany's voice came through clearly, unhurried, certain of herself. "The best gift you could give us this weekend is to just disappear from our family." Then Daniel. "Mom, Brittany is right. You've been a lot. Maybe just take a step back." Then me, very quiet. You're right. I should go. I stopped the recording. Officer Sutton looked at the phone, then at the portfolio, then at me. He had the expression of a man carefully revising a first impression. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, how long have you been managing your own finances? 47 years. I taught high school English for 35 of them, managed our household budget through a recession and my husband's 2-year illness, and I have never in my life missed a bill payment. I folded my hands on the table. I drive myself wherever I need to go. I read 2 newspapers a day and a book a week. I play bridge on Thursdays, and I was until this weekend teaching a free literacy class at the Riverside Community Center on Tuesday mornings. I paused. Is there a specific aspect of my cognitive function you'd like to assess? Something shifted in Officer Sutton's expression. It might have been the beginning of a smile, carefully suppressed. No, ma'am, he said. I think I have a clear picture. We spoke for another 25 minutes. By the end, he'd made several pages of notes, and I'd finished my coffee. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, walking me out, I'm going to close this as unfounded. No further action in police terms. I do want to give you information about elder financial abuse resources, because what you've described, the pattern of financial dependency and the response when you set a limit, is worth having on record. I appreciate that. Off the record? He stopped at the door, looked at me directly. You seem like you've got this handled. I'm getting there, I said. My phone rang as I pulled out of the precinct parking lot. Daniel. The officer called, he said. He said the welfare check is being closed. Because I'm not the one experiencing cognitive decline in this relationship. A long pause. Mom, what Brittany did, calling the police, that was wrong. I told her that. Did you? I did. She knows it was wrong. He sounded exhausted, genuinely. She's been crying since yesterday morning. Not the way she was Friday night. Differently. I waited. I think she's scared, he said. I think we both are. You should be, I said, not unkindly. You've been building a life on a foundation that someone else was quietly holding up, and now that person has stepped back. That is genuinely frightening. I understand that. I signaled and turned onto the main road. But Daniel, you should have been scared 2 years ago. You should have been scared when you realized you were spending $4,000 a month more than you earned, and somebody else was making up the difference. The fear you're feeling now is just the truth arriving late. Silence. Wednesday at 2 o'clock, I said. Sandra's office. Don't be late. I wasn't expecting Carol Whitfield. I'd seen her at the rehearsal dinner, a tall woman, early 60s, silver hair worn in a chignon, the kind of easy, practiced elegance that looks effortless because it took decades to develop. She'd been pleasant to me at dinner in the way that people are pleasant to someone they've decided not to think too hard about. We hadn't spoken beyond the minimum. She walked into the hotel restaurant on Tuesday afternoon and sat down across from me without asking, which I respected more than I expected to. I'm Carol Whitfield, she said. Brittany's mother. Something flickered across her face. I still sometimes call her Amanda. It's her middle name. She switched to Brittany in college. She said it the way you say something you've never quite made peace with. May I speak with you? You're already sitting down, I said. So yes. A waiter appeared. She ordered coffee. I let the silence settle between us without trying to fill it, which seemed to surprise her. I want to thank you, she said. I hadn't expected that. For showing my daughter the consequences of who she's been, Carol continued. I've been worried about Brittany for years. The entitlement, the way she treats people, the complete absence of gratitude. I kept hoping marriage would mature her. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I drove to their house Sunday morning. Brittany was in pieces, and my first instinct, my immediate instinct, was to fix it. Pay for a makeup dinner, call in a favor, make the problem go away. But you didn't. I almost did. She looked at me steadily. Then I watched Brittany scream at Daniel for 20 minutes about how you had ruined everything, and I realized she genuinely believes that. She genuinely believes that the person who was wronged is responsible for the consequences of the wrong. Carol paused. And I realized that I taught her that. Every time I smoothed things over, I taught her that someone else would always absorb the damage. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Carol reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table between us. Brittany asked me to give you this, $30,000, her portion of her father's life insurance. She wants to use it as a good faith payment toward your ownership stake. I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it. Carol watched me. Then, very slowly, she picked it up herself. She held it for a moment, and then she tore it cleanly in half and set the two pieces on the table between us. My husband spent 30 years rescuing Brittany from her own choices, she said. I spent 30 years letting him. We raised a daughter who doesn't understand that love isn't a transaction. And we did it by making everything transactional. Here's money. Problem solved. No need to actually feel anything. She reached into her purse and placed a business card on the table. I'm flying back to Savannah tomorrow, but if you ever want to talk to someone who understands what it is to love a child who has disappointed you, and to know that some of that disappointment belongs to you, please call. After she left, I sat alone with the two halves of the torn envelope and thought about something George had said to me once years ago about a colleague who had taken credit for my work. Eleanor, you are the most forgiving person I've ever known. But forgiveness isn't the same as permission. I'd forgiven that colleague. Given her permission too, as it turned out. I was done giving permission. Sandra Powell's office had the particular atmosphere of a place where serious decisions were made. Dark wood, tall bookshelves, the smell of good coffee and older paper. She'd been practicing law for 30 years, and she had the easy calm of someone who had learned early that warmth and firmness were not opposites. Daniel and Brittany arrived 11 minutes late. I was already seated. I watched them come in. Daniel in a button-down, tired around the eyes, but trying. Brittany in dark slacks and a simple blouse, no jewelry except her new wedding ring. She looked younger without her usual armor. Smaller somehow, like a version of herself that had been reduced to its actual dimensions. She didn't look at me when she sat down. Sandra spread the documents across the conference table with brisk efficiency. Let's review what we're working with, she said. Yay. Eleanor provided $92,000 toward the purchase of the property at 417 Birchwood Lane. She is listed as a co-borrower on the mortgage and holds a 38% ownership interest on the deed. The current market value of the property is approximately $315,000. Eleanor's 38% represents roughly $119,700. Brittany's jaw tightened. We don't have that. I know, Sandra said. A silence that had some weight to it. I'd spent 3 days deciding what I wanted to say in this room. In the end, I decided to simply be honest. It was the thing I'd been worst at these past 3 years, and I thought it was time to practice. I'm not here to take your house, I said. They both looked at me. Brittany for the first time since she'd walked in. I want to be clear about that, I continued. The $92,000 I gave you was every dollar I had saved outside of my monthly retirement income. If I walk away from my legal interest in that house, I walk away with nothing. No cushion, no security, nothing to leave behind. And I am 67 years old. Daniel looked like I'd struck him. I don't think he'd ever actually done that calculation before. I have a proposal, I sat said. Sandra handed them each a single sheet of paper. I'll sell my 38% interest back to you for $80,000, nearly $40,000 less than current market value. You can finance that through a home equity loan. I paused. But there are conditions. I watched them read. The first condition, Brittany would obtain employment within 60 days, maintained for a minimum of 18 months. The second, one of their 2 cars sold within 30 days, proceeds going directly to credit card debt. The third, monthly financial check-ins with Sandra for 24 months, bank statements, credit reports, proof of income. The fourth, no new debt without written consent from Eleanor during those 24 months. The fifth, Daniel would call Eleanor once a week, not about money, not about the house, just to talk. Brittany read the fifth condition twice. Then she looked up at me, and something in her expression shifted. Not softness exactly, more like the look you get when you finally understand the shape of something you'd been trying not to see directly. Condition 5 doesn't have anything to do with the house, she said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. A long silence settled over the room. We'll need a few days to review this, Daniel started carefully. Then he looked at Brittany. Something passed between them, the private shorthand of 2 people who have been arguing for days and have finally reached the far edge of it. He looked back at me. Actually, we don't need a few days. We accept. Sandra looked up from her notepad. All of it? I asked. All 5 conditions. Brittany's voice was quiet. steady. All of them. Sandra clicked her pen. I'll begin drafting the formal agreement today. As we gathered our things to leave, Brittany stood, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something. I could see her working through it, the way you do when everything available seems insufficient. In the end, she just said, "Thank you for the 60-day window." "You're welcome," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left open, which was more than either of us had managed in 3 years. I thought that was enough to start with. The formal agreement was signed 3 weeks later. Sandra filed it with the county recorder's office on a Wednesday in early November, and I drove home from her office feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because everything was finally real. The equity loan went through in December. I received the first payment on the 15th, which happened to be the anniversary of the day George and I had signed the papers on our very first home together, 39 years ago. I chose to take that as a sign. The apartment at Riverside Senior Community, where I moved the same week the agreement was signed, was on the 2nd floor, with windows that faced east. I hadn't planned that specifically. I'd simply taken what was available when I called on a Monday morning with a suitcase in my car and no permanent address. But it turned out to be the best accident of the whole difficult season. Every morning the light came in low and golden across the wood floor, and I'd taken to sitting in the armchair by the window with my coffee before I did anything else, just watching the day arrive. George had always said I was a morning person who didn't know it yet. It had taken me 67 years and losing everything to find out he was right. The community itself was quieter than I'd expected. Not the shuffleboard and bingo caricature I'd carried in my head without ever examining it, but a collection of actual people living actual lives who happened to all be past a certain age. There was a woman named Ruth on my floor who had published 3 novels after turning 60 and was working on a 4th. There was a retired federal judge named Harold who played chess in the common room every afternoon and talked about his grandchildren with the particular helpless devotion of someone who had spent decades being formidable and found it completely useless against a 6-year-old. And there was Tom Aldridge, in apartment 2F, who introduced himself by knocking on my door 3 days after I moved in and handing me a small potted rosemary plant. "Housewarming," he said. He was perhaps 70, with a weathered open face and the easy calm of someone who'd made peace with most things. "I'm Tom. I was a CPA for 40 years. My wife passed 2 years ago. I walk every morning at 7 if you ever want company, and I make very good coffee if you ever want that instead." I looked at the rosemary. "Eleanor Hartwell. I was a high school English teacher. My husband passed 4 years ago. I would like both the walk and the coffee, but probably not at the same time." He smiled. "Fair enough." I put the rosemary on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light could reach it. Every time I trimmed it for cooking, I thought about the herb garden I'd planted in Brittany's kitchen window, overgrown and untended. This one I was keeping for myself. The first month was quieter than I'd expected and harder than I wanted to admit. Not because of Daniel and Brittany. The legal paperwork moved forward steadily, and Daniel called every Wednesday at 7 in the evening as agreed. The conversations were stilted at first, short and careful, then gradually less so. He told me about work. I told him about Ruth's novel and Harold's chess games. We talked around the edges of the larger things, which I thought was probably right for now. You can't rebuild a house in a day. You start with the foundation and work up. The quiet was harder because of George. In their house, there had always been something to do. A meal to plan, a bill to smooth over, a conversation to manage. The constant motion of being needed had kept me from noticing how much I missed him. Now, in the clean, uncomplicated space of my own apartment, with no one else's emergencies to attend to, the missing arrived in full. I took to talking to his photograph again, the way I had in the early days after his death. Not long conversations, just small things. The rosemary is doing well. Tom Aldridge makes very good coffee. You were right about that. I'm reading Marilyn Robinson again. I think I understand her better now than I did before. I'd also gone back to teaching at the Riverside Community Center 2 blocks from the apartment. The Tuesday morning literacy class I'd mentioned to Officer Sutton. 6 students, all adults, learning to read with the fierce concentration of people who understand exactly what the stakes are. A man named Curtis who wanted to read his grandchildren's birthday cards himself. A woman named Dolores who wanted to read her own medical paperwork without asking anyone for help. I came home from every class feeling scraped out and refilled, which is the only way I know to describe what good work does. I was walking back from the community center on a Tuesday morning in mid-January, thinking about Curtis's progress with vowel sounds when my phone rang. Daniel, on a Tuesday, not a Wednesday, which was unusual enough that I picked up immediately. Mom, his voice had something in it I couldn't quite name. I need to tell you something. About Brittany. I stopped walking. The cold air was sharp. Is she all right? She's fine. She got a job. A pause. Office manager position at a dental practice in Chesapeake. She started 5 weeks ago. I stood very still on the sidewalk. She wanted me to tell you first, Daniel continued, because she was nervous to say it herself and then have to sit across from Sandra pretending to look at spreadsheets if you didn't react the way she hoped. She's been there 5 weeks and didn't say anything? She wanted to make sure it stuck before she told anyone, in case she wasn't good at it. Another pause, and I could hear something in it. Pride, genuine and slightly surprised. She is good at it. Her boss called her a natural organizer with exceptional people skills. I stood on the sidewalk in the January cold, thinking about Brittany managing rooms full of people toward outcomes she'd already decided on. Those skills had always been there. She'd simply been using them for the wrong purposes. Tell her congratulations, I said. And tell her she can say things directly to me, Daniel. She doesn't have to send you first. A short silence. I know. We're working on it. It was the following Tuesday that it happened. I arrived at the community center a few minutes early, the way I usually did, to get the materials sorted before the students arrived. I came in through the side entrance and turned right toward the classroom wing, and very nearly walked directly into Brittany. She was coming out of a door marked Financial Wellness Workshop, Tuesdays 9 a.m., carrying a tote bag full of printed handouts, a dry erase marker in one hand, and a paper coffee cup in the other. She was wearing slacks and a blazer, real work clothes, not the carefully constructed fashion she'd used to armor herself in her previous life, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. We both stopped. The hallway was empty. Somewhere deeper into the building, a photocopier hummed steadily. I didn't know you worked here, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. She cleared her throat. Daniel didn't mention. He didn't know, I said. I never told him which center. Oh. How long have you been running the financial workshop? She looked back at the door she'd just come through. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The same 6 weeks I'd been teaching literacy 15 feet down the same hallway, on the same Tuesday mornings. We had somehow never arrived or left at quite the same moment. I thought of something George used to say. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor and absolutely no sense of timing. He'd said it whenever things arrived late and exactly right, which, in his experience, was most of the time. What do you teach? I asked. Brittany looked down at the handouts in her bag. Budgeting, debt management, how to read a credit report. A pause. Basic things. Things I should have learned a long time ago. I looked at her, really looked, the way I hadn't allowed myself to in Sandra's office, where I'd needed to stay clear-eyed and businesslike. She looked tired in the way that working people look tired. Legitimately, productively, the tiredness of someone who has used themselves up doing something real. Brittany, I said, would you like to get coffee? She looked at me for a moment, as if checking whether I meant it. Yes, she said. I would. We sat in the community center's small cafe, really just a counter with 4 tables and a very good espresso machine operated by a volunteer named Patrick, who was 81 and had strong opinions about foam. And for the first 15 minutes we talked about almost nothing. The cold weather, Patrick's foam opinions. A story in the morning news about a dog trained to detect low blood sugar. I let her find her way to it. She would, or she wouldn't. She found her way to it. Can I say something? She said, looking at her coffee cup. Not the thing I said at Sandra's office. That was real, but it was also what you say when someone has a legal document in front of them and you need them to believe you've changed. She looked up. This is different. I waited. I grew up thinking that love was what people gave you because of what you were, not what you did, she said. My father was generous, in the way that meant nobody around him ever had to be uncomfortable. If I made a mistake, he fixed it. If someone was upset with me, he smoothed it over. She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. I thought that was love. I thought love meant somebody standing between you and the consequences of being yourself. The cafe was warm. Outside, a group of residents walked along the path circling the community garden, bundled into their winter coats. When you left, Brittany continued, and the reception was gone and then the house situation, I was so angry at you. For weeks, I kept thinking she's doing this to punish us. She could fix it and she won't. A pause. And then I started working. Actually working for the first time since I was 26. And I started teaching this class. And I'd stand up there every Tuesday morning talking to these women about where their money goes and why it matters. And I kept doing the math on myself, on what I'd been doing, on what you'd been absorbing. She was quiet for a moment. I treated you like my father treated me, she said finally. Like someone whose job was to stand between me and reality. She looked up. That's not love. I know that now. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Not because I need something from you. Just because it's true. I thought about George's letter, which I hadn't yet received, and somehow felt the edges of what it would say. Brittany, I said, I'm not going to tell you it was all right, because it wasn't. But I'm also not going to hold it over you for the rest of your life, because that would exhaust both of us and accomplish nothing. I folded my hands around my cup. What I'm going to do is pay attention to who you are now, not who you were. She nodded once. Then again, more slowly, like something settling into place. Okay, she said. I can work with that. The call from Sandra came on a Thursday afternoon in February, gray and cold, the kind of day that makes Virginia feel much farther north than it is. Eleanor, I need you to come to the office. There's something I've been holding for you. Her voice had a quality I couldn't quite name, careful and also relieved, like someone setting down something they'd carried a long way. I think it's time. I drove over without asking questions. Sandra had earned that much trust. She was waiting in her office with the door closed, and on the desk in front of her was an envelope. Old, the paper had gone the particular cream to yellow of things kept in a drawer for years. The handwriting on the front was in blue ink, careful and slightly tilted to the right in the way that George's handwriting had always been, the way I'd watched it sign birthday cards and grocery lists and our mortgage papers 39 years ago. For Eleanor. To be opened when she no longer needs it. I sat down slowly. He gave it to me before he passed, Sandra said quietly. He made me promise not to give it to you until, she paused. He said you'd know when the right time was, and that if you didn't know, I should use my judgment. A small breath. I've been carrying this for 4 years, Eleanor. I think this is the time. She stood and went out, closing the door softly behind her. The office was very still. Outside the window, the February sky was the flat white of a page before anything is written on it. I opened the envelope. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means Sandra decided the time was right, which means she thinks you've done something hard. Sandra has excellent judgment, so I'll trust her on that. I want to start with this. I have never in my life been as proud of anyone as I have been of you. Not in the dramatic moments, though there were plenty of those, but in the ordinary ones. The way you showed up, every day, for 37 years of marriage and 35 years of teaching and all the years of being someone's mother and someone's friend and someone's whole world. You showed up when it cost you something. That is the only kind of showing up that counts. I know you, my love. I know that whatever hard thing you just did, you've been asking yourself whether you went too far, whether you were too much or not enough, or whether the version of you that acted is someone you recognize. She is. She's the truest version of you, the one who always knew her own worth but spent decades being polite about it. Here is what I want you to know, and please read this part slowly. You do not owe anyone your diminishment, not to keep the peace, not to be loved, not for any reason. You were the most generous person in any room you ever entered, but generosity is only a virtue when it comes from abundance. When you give from your fullness, not from your fear. When you give from fear of being left, from fear of being too much, from fear of taking up space you've earned. That isn't generosity, Eleanor. That's erosion. And I watched it happen, and I should have said something sooner, and I'm sorry that I didn't. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be known for who you are, and not just what you provide. You deserve mornings that belong to you, and coffee that stays hot, and someone who asks about your day because they actually want to know. You deserve a life that fits you. Go find it. It's not too late. It was never too late. I love you across every version of time there is. George P.S. If Sandra is making you read this in her office, tell her I said she can stop being so dramatic about it. She always did have a flair for the occasion. I folded the letter along its original creases. I sat with it for a long time in Sandra's quiet office while the February light shifted slowly across the desk. The tears came in the car, stopped at a red light on the way home, when something that had been held very tightly for a very long time finally let go. Not grief exactly, or not only grief. More like the release of something I'd been bracing against so long I'd forgotten I was bracing. By the time I got home, I was all right. I put the letter in the nightstand drawer beside George's photograph. Then I put on my coat and walked to Tom Aldridge's apartment and knocked on the door. He opened it with the easy calm of a man who had learned not to be surprised by much. "Coffee?" he said. "Please," I said, "and maybe a walk after. I could use the air." The invitation to Sunday dinner came on a Wednesday evening near the end of March. Daniel called at 7 on schedule, but there was something different in his voice, a carefulness, like he was carrying something fragile and trying not to show it. "Mom, Brittany wants to know." He stopped, started again. "We want to know if you'd come to dinner on Sunday. Nothing special. Brittany's been learning to cook. She made pasta last week that was actually pretty good." A small laugh, genuine and slightly surprised. "She wants to try it on someone other than me." I looked out my window at the community garden, just beginning to show the first tentative green of early spring. Tom and I had a walk planned for Sunday morning. In the afternoon, I'd signed up for a lecture at the library, a local historian talking about Virginia in the Civil War, something I'd been quietly looking forward to for 2 weeks. "I have things in this morning and the afternoon," I said. "But I could come for dinner, around 6? A pause, as though he'd braced for more resistance. "Yeah, 6 is perfect." "Tell Brittany I'll bring bread. Homemade bread goes with everything, and it's harder to ruin than it sounds." Another laugh, warmer this time. "She'll appreciate that." I stood in the driveway of 417 Birchwood Lane for a moment before going in. It looked the same from the outside. Of course it did. The hydrangeas I'd helped plant along the front walk were just beginning to bud, a few weeks behind schedule from the long winter. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see the warm yellow light of the kitchen, and a shape moving around inside that I knew was Brittany. I'd spent 3 years walking in and out of this house, feeling like an intruder in my own investment. Like I had to justify my presence, calibrate my opinions, make myself smaller than I was. I'd brought groceries and paid bills and planted hydrangeas and told myself it was love. It was love. That part was true, but it was also something else. The particular self-erasure of a person who has confused being needed with being wanted. I picked up the bread from the passenger seat, still warm in its cloth wrap, and went up the front walk. Brittany opened the door before I knocked. She must have seen the headlights. She looked. I want to get this right, because the word matters. She looked present. The careful performance I'd known for 3 years had been built out of surfaces, the right outfit, the right smile, the right level of warmth calibrated to whatever temperature was most useful. The person at the door was simply a woman, slightly flushed from the kitchen, a dish towel over one shoulder, her hair coming loose from its ponytail in a way she hadn't bothered to fix. "You made bread," she said. I said I would. She stepped back to let me in, and I crossed the threshold of the house my money had bought, and for the first time since all of this began, I did it without calculating what it had cost me. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something herby and the faint char of something that had gotten a little too close to the bottom of the pan. "I nearly lost the sauce," Brittany said immediately. "It stuck. I got distracted reading about Chianti." "The recipe called for Chianti?" "Yes. I didn't know what it was, so I spent 10 minutes looking it up, and by the time I looked up, the sauce had stuck." She lifted the lid on the pot and peered at it with intense, anxious focus. "I added more tomatoes. It's a different sauce than I meant to make." "May I?" I set the bread on the counter and held out my hand for the spoon. She handed it over. I tasted it, added a pinch of salt, tasted again, reached for the dried oregano, right where I'd always kept it, on the second shelf, which meant she hadn't rearranged everything after all. I shook a small amount into my palm and rubbed it between my fingers before adding it, the way my mother had taught me. "That's a technique," Brittany said, watching. "Warms the oils in the herb, releases more flavor." I stirred. "Your sauce is fine, better than fine. You used good tomatoes." She let out a breath. I've been cooking for 3 months and I still hold my breath every time. That's how it's supposed to feel. The day it stops mattering is the day the food gets boring. She was quiet for a moment. Then, without making a production of it, "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," I said. And I meant both things equally. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway with a bottle of wine and the expression of a man who had been listening from the hallway and was trying not to look like it. He was not particularly convincing about it. He got that from me. "Should I open this?" he said. "Please," said Brittany. "Yes," I said. We ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, slightly crowded because Daniel had forgotten to unfold the leaf, which felt right somehow, and the pasta was genuinely good, and the bread was better, and the Chianti was something Brittany now knew more about than strictly necessary. We talked about Daniel's project at work. We talked about Curtis from my literacy class, who had gotten through his first full chapter book and brought me chocolates to celebrate. We talked about the community garden at Riverside, and Tom's strong opinions on composting, and a book I was reading about the American West that had made me want to see Utah before I died. Nobody mentioned money. Nobody mentioned the house. Nobody mentioned the long, difficult months that had brought us to this table. We didn't need to. It was all there, the way all real history is, present in the room without being spoken, the weight that makes ordinary things feel solid. After dinner, Brittany washed the dishes. I dried. Daniel put things away, which meant he stood near the cabinet asking where things went, which we both tolerated with the relaxed patience of people who have made peace with a particular specific limitation. At the door, leaving, I put on my coat and Brittany said, "Same time next month?" I looked at her, at Daniel behind her, trying not to look hopeful and not quite managing it. "Same time next month," I said. "I'll bring something different. Do you like apple cake?" "I don't know," Brittany said. "I don't think I've ever had it." "Then you're overdue," I said, and I went down the front walk to my car, past the hydrangeas just beginning to bud, into the cool and quiet and perfectly adequate March night. I sat by my window that evening with George's letter open on my knee, not reading it. I knew it by now. Just keeping it company. The community garden was dark below. Tomorrow I'd walk with Tom at 7. Tuesday I'd teach Curtis and Dolores and the others. Wednesday Daniel would call. The month after that I'd bring apple cake to Birchwood Lane and we'd be a little easier with each other than we were tonight, because that is how it works. Slowly, without announcement, one ordinary evening at a time. I was 67 years old. I had a rosemary plant that was thriving and an east-facing window and a friend down the hall who made very good coffee. I had a son who was learning at 40 that love is not a transaction. I had a daughter-in-law who was standing in front of a whiteboard on Tuesday mornings teaching women how to read their own finances, which I thought was perhaps the most honest form of apology available to her, and I was choosing to accept it. I had George's voice in my head saying, "Go find a life that fits you." And for the first time, I understood what he meant. Not a life without difficulty, not a life without loss or longing or the particular ache of things that cannot be undone. Just a life where the shape of it matched the shape of me, where I took up the space I was entitled to, no more and no less, and stopped apologizing for existing at full size. I folded the letter, put it away. Outside, the first stars were visible over the garden, the early ones that appear while the sky is still more blue than black, before the full dark comes in and makes everything clear. I thought, this is enough. And then, more quietly, more honestly, this is more than enough. This is mine.